next webinar later. Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us here today. My name is Denise Harlow. I'm CEO of the National Community Action Partnership. I'm joined by Mary Beth Schneber-Remrev, our Director of Organizational Capacity Building here at the Partnership, and we are thrilled today to host our webinar, Community Action 101. And boy, do we have a slide deck chock full of information for you. And so my apologies right off the bat if we miss stuff or we fly by stuff too quickly. We are recording this. You'll be able to access the recording and the slides. You'll be able to rewind and watch a few things again if there's something there that catches your interest. And we do want to answer your questions. So again, please use the chat or the Q&A window. Let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. Well, we'll start Community Action 101 like we start most every webinar and meeting and conference that we do at the National Community Action Partnership. And many of you may also do this at your own local agency, maybe at your board meeting, at your staff meeting, or all-day staff retreats. The Community Action Promise is something that binds us as a network together. As we'll talk about, every local community action agency has a different mission statement. They might have a different value statement or a vision statement. We'll have different logos, different names. But the thing that really binds us together is this promise. And so you'll hear us talk and read the promise aloud frequently, again, at partnership events. So I'm going to do that here for us today. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. I hope that you start your day with the promise of community action, because every day it's something else different jumps out at me. Today, I'll say that it is that we care about the entire community. Earlier today, I was able to attend a Black Health Summit sponsored by the Department of Health and Human Services here in Washington, D.C., talking distinctly about health equity. But it really leans deeply, I think, into the history and purpose and promise of community action. Next slide, please. So, this may not be a surprise, but the thing we definitely want to also highlight early on is that your agency, you are part of an extended family of community action. There are more than 1,000 local community action agencies. 75% or so are nonprofit, 501c3 charitable nonprofit community action agencies. Another 250, give or take, are public community action agencies, which means they are units of local government. And we have folks on today from both nonprofit private CAPs and public CAPs. And you'll hear me use the word CAP, CAA, community action agency, local agency, eligible entities. All that stuff means community action agency. So excuse me for my parlance, but I do slip into the word CAP frequently. But you'll also see here on this slide that we have more than 44 state associations. Not all states have a staffed state association. For instance, the Maryland Association actually represents the community action agencies in Maryland, the one in Washington, D.C., and the one agency that serves the state of Delaware. So there's no one way to talk about community action, but the important thing is that we are all part of the same family. In addition, we have our state offices across this country, the state CSBG offices, both in the states as well as territories, the District of Columbia, obviously. So it is an extended network that also includes the Office of Community Services, HHS, ACF. We're going to talk about some of those layers a little bit later. But just so you know, coast to coast, red, blue, purple, we are nonpartisan. We are here to serve America. Next slide, please. And before I turn it over to Mary Beth, I want to just highlight Sergeant Shriver. And we're going to talk a little bit later about David Bradley's History of the War on Poverty training that he does. And he talks a lot about Sergeant Shriver. Shriver is the grandfather of community action. He was the first director of the Office of Economic Opportunity appointed by President Johnson. And I love this quote. What can change the world today is the same thing that has changed it in the past. An idea and the service of dedicated, committed individuals to that idea. That is community action in 1964, and that's community action today. You are part of our legacy, our history, our today, and our future. So we look forward to today's conversation. And Mary Beth, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Denise, and good afternoon, Community Action. It's so great to be with you, and gosh, your turnout is unbelievable. So now we're curious. We want to know, what is one word that you use to describe community action? Like, what comes to your mind and your heart when you hear the term community action? We'd love for you to put that into the chat window. Help, change, support. I see a lot of support. Yes, huggy heart. We love our huggy hearts. You're going to see a lot of huggy hearts today. Compassion, engagement, right? Equity. It's not that we just provide services. We empower people and enable people to engage in our systems. Impact, flexibility, caring, equality. I mean, oh my goodness, look at that chat go. And here's the thing. All of you have different views of community action. All of you have different things that come up for you about community action. And that's because community action, as Denise said, isn't just one thing. There's so many things that we as a community action network do. So who are we as community action agencies? At our core, our network meets individuals and families where they are, and we work to help individuals and families and communities really succeed. And there are a lot of ways that we do that. We, of course, provide services, but beyond that, we really seek to build power with people that we serve by centering what our customers want and supporting them in building power. And we do that through a variety of approaches, right? Some of you have heard of the term a whole family approach, or maybe you use trauma-informed care, or maybe you have person-centered services. There's a lot of different ways that community action approaches our work. But also want to name that we recognize that poverty is not just the result of individual choices, right? We recognize that there are larger systematic forces that really create, or they might perpetuate, some of the cycles of poverty that we see in our communities. And so we as community action agencies don't just stop at serving individuals and families. We seek to address those forces in our communities head on by going upstream and working at the systems and community levels. And then beyond that, community action has a rich history of being an incubator for strategies that address the causes and conditions of, you always hear the term poverty. I'm going to use the term economic injustice today. We really share out what we learn with our fellow community action agencies when we serve as incubators, with our states, with our national level, and beyond. So we work with everyone in community action, from the single parents to the grandparents. We do a variety of different things, and we share out our lessons learned broadly. You have joined an amazing network. If you're new here, my goodness, community action has some of the best people. And we are a network of over 1,000 high-performing agencies that serve 99% of America's counties. But guys, if you have seen one community action agency, you have seen one community action agency. And that's because all of our communities are different, right? We know that at least in community action, at least every 3 years, our agencies conduct a community assessment to understand the local needs, the resources, the assets, and the dreams of a community. And then based on that unique profile, we seek to offer the most relevant and needed services and strategies. And that is typically far more than one service, right? And you can see a variety of services listed on the screen. We use a whole family approach. Perhaps we have crucial life-saving emergency assistance, right? Food, energy, we keep the lights on. But we also do healthcare. Some agencies are federally qualified health centers. We run health clinics. We have women's health. We might have mobile health. We do a lot in the housing space, a lot in early childhood and Head Start. Senior services. I mean, you see the variety of services that we provide. The big takeaway here is that there's no one look to a community action agency. We all use different approaches based on what our communities need. And so, want to offer up one more frame to think about the work that we do. It's not just about building wealth, because poverty is more than a lack of money. We really just seek power and justice with the people and communities that we serve. So, Denise, I think that begs the question, we're one of a variety of social service providers, right? But are we really different?
That's a really good question. I believe that we are. I believe that community action is unique in its history, its structure, its diversity of programs and services that meet the unique needs of local communities. That we take multiple streams of federal funding and it looks different in Des Moines than it does in Detroit. That it looks different in New York City as it does in Topeka, right? Salvation Army, the Red Cross, Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services, UJA. There are many multi-service types of nonprofits. And they're all wonderful partners. They provide wonderful services. But we are, I think, built a little bit differently. And sometimes people say, are we really all that special? And it's okay that we are special. We, again, have a very unique history that we're going to talk about here today. And we are, one of the only that have a federal mandate to fight poverty in America. It's in statute. We're going to talk about the CSBG Act, we're going to talk about the Economic Opportunity Act, but it's in statute that it's our job to harness all available resources to fight poverty. When I have to talk about community action, it's a very hard elevator speech, I'm just going to say. But we talk about this national infrastructure to fight poverty in America, that this country made the commitment in 1964, and they have upheld that commitment through today. So we aren't here just to do childcare, not here just to do housing, not here just to do healthcare services, for instance. We're here to figure out what our community needs and lean in to end poverty in our communities. Next slide. So we have to be flexible, we have to be flexible. We could teach classes every day from local agencies about how local agencies could lead those conversations in communities and classrooms, but at the policy level, how to be flexible. We're also highly accountable. Many nonprofits don't necessarily have to have a full-fledged audit, but most community action agencies do because of the amount of federal funding that you receive. We're going to talk about the CSBG org standards a little bit later, but there's a lot of elements that give us a high level of accountability. Also, many of you have probably heard the term tripartite board, right? So that is a unique structure. Now, some other nonprofits, you might see 51% of the board need to be people living with HIV/AIDS, for instance. You might see housing groups that have certain percentages on their board as well. But community action has again, a unique structure. 1/3 from the private sector, like a typical nonprofit. 1/3 are elected officials, and 1/3 are individuals who have been democratically selected from low-income communities. That means the entire community has a responsibility to come to this table to fight poverty together. One of the other unique elements, again, set out in statute, is that we are required to do a local needs assessment or local community assessment every 3 years. You'll see this if you saw the accountable care or the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, excuse me. There's a requirement in there for the health systems to also do community health assessments. We've been ahead of that curve for many, many years. And we see in places where those things are happening together. But so those are some of the unique elements. We're flexible, highly accountable. And I use the nonprofit frame for the board, but public caps also have to have an advisory body or an administrative body that reflects that tripartite structure too. Makes us incredibly embedded in our community, in and of the community. Next slide, please. And why do we need to be flexible? Because poverty is always changing, isn't it? Our communities ebb and flow. And poverty today, we see incredible income disparities by race, gender. We see wealth disparities in addition to income disparities, right? How much are in people's retirement? How many people own homes? What kind of assets do families have? There's incredible wealth disparities as well. As you know, the partner we're going to talk about here today, a lot of our work in community action is grounded in equity. We have our roots in the history of the civil rights movement, and we are leaning in and living into that promise today about making sure that we embed and bake in equity into all of our work. So Another element on here that I like to raise and elevate is the affordable housing crisis. And I use the word crisis because I think many of you could reflect in your own local communities what's happened over the last few years with rental prices, and home prices are just pricing so many people out of safe and stable housing. And certainly the COVID pandemic is still part of our lives. It may not be where we were 2 years ago, but we know the ramifications of the pandemic are still with us. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn over to Mary Beth to walk us through some of the dates and time, unless there's something in the chat, Mary Beth, that I missed that we should circle back to at this point.
No, just seeing some thoughts about needs assessments and framing of that community action seeks to offer opportunities, not services. So maybe both, right? We offer services and opportunities because in some cases we need services for people to be able to take advantage of opportunity, right? But that's the thing, is that our agencies might look different in different places, and it will look different over time, right? The services we provide today are likely not the services our communities will need tomorrow. So we're talking about poverty today, but as we've been saying, community action has a rich history, and over time, our network has changed, and there has been significant change in response both to poverty, to politics, to things that are going on societally for us. And so also want to point out that as we go through history, you're going to see our values of community action really play out. And we're going to try to call those out for you when we see them in our history. So during the State of the Union in 1964, I want to take you back to 1964, President Lyndon Johnson declared a war on poverty. And it was in the spirit of the work of John F. Kennedy, who had recently been assassinated. And so it's wild when you think about this. I want to point out the date, January 1964. It was quite a different world because it was only a few short months later, August 1964, that President Johnson signed the Economic Opportunity Act. This is our founding as a community action network and kind of the seminal piece of legislation for the war on poverty. And so it founded, the EOA, we're going to talk about this, the EOA funded a number of war on poverty strategies and programs that still live today. We are amongst them, though, that were founded that day. And so the Economic Opportunity Act, this is the original language from the act, and this is a particularly powerful passage from it. The one piece I really want to call your attention to is that we see the recognition that poverty is more than a lack of monetary resources, that people really deserve the ability to fully participate in society, right? A recognition that we don't all have the same opportunity to participate. In the Economic Opportunity Act itself, you will see the term maximum feasible participation. And that's the idea that the people who experience poverty should be involved in as much as possible in the administration of not just our community action agencies, but in the systems of the community, right? Be on city council, sit on neighborhood boards, be in positions of power to build a better network and build a better community that works for everybody. And so the other piece I want to call out that you're going to see here, and it's italicized, underlined, is this recognition that we have a moral obligation to eliminate what they call the paradox of poverty in the midst of plenty. We are the richest nation in the country, and it is a moral injustice that we see poverty persist in face of that plenty. And so that is really where we're founded from. And our specific catalytic vision as community action is that this idea that the community action agency exists not just to provide services, but to coordinate a service structure, right? That goes back to what Denise was saying, that infrastructure to better serve people and communities. And there is, again, that recognition that poverty is not the same across the country, and that it should be the local level who decides how to address poverty. And by the way, that local level needs federal money, right? It's not enough to say, okay, local communities, go address poverty. You need resources to do that. That's one of the really unique things about the Economic Opportunity Act that you should be aware of is that at this time, the federal government didn't just sign this law in, they actually put money behind it. And so at this time, the federal government directly funded local community action agencies because they recognized that they needed those resources to address those local causes and conditions of poverty. It was not directive. It was not, you must do this with this money. It was very broad. It was very flexible from the get-go. There was no state government, no local government involvement, etc. Remember that point because it's going to come up in just a minute. So I had mentioned that there are a number of other programs that were created under the Economic Opportunity Act, or the EOA. And so here you can see some of our brothers and sister programs that were founded. Vista, Job Corps. I mean, how many of you have Vista today, right? And leverage Vista in your services now? Head Start is a big one, right? Denise, is it something like 30% of the network has Head Start?
50% of the network runs Head Start, and we serve 30% of the nation's Head Start children.
There you go. Glad you had that right there. Thank you. Yeah, but so, I mean, we're a big force in Head Start, right? And it's not a coincidence that we were created alongside each other and that there's such overlap between what we offer. But you can see the number of other programs that were created and that community action agencies still administer today. So we're talking a lot about shifting power, about bringing money into local communities, local control. And I bet you can imagine that this shift in power really made some folks really uncomfortable. And there were two important amendments that were made to the Economic Opportunity Act as a result of some of the politics of things, right? So the first is the Green Amendment. And this amendment said that local governments could designate who the community action agency was in the community. And so that gave local government more control over who were the poverty fighters in their communities. So most communities named whatever agency had been operating, but in some big cities in particular, the city declared themselves the community action agency. Public caps, not all public caps, but a lot of public caps came about from the Green Amendment. Also the Quay Amendment, which is the rule of three, if you will. This is where we get that 1/3 of our board has to be public officials, 1/3 private, well, it's the remainder private, and at least 1/3 people with low incomes. This is an important shift because it's an attempt to limit that maximum feasible participation, right? And ensure that there are public officials involved in the oversight of the agency and the direction of the resources that agencies have. And so these things live on today. We no longer have the Economic Opportunity Act, but you see the effects of these live on. Our boards still operate in this tripartite fashion.
I want to build on that just for a moment,
Yeah.
Mary Beth. I think it's such an important element. Today, right, we hold up the tripartite board because it is the tool we have, right, to really live into the maximum feasible participation. But it is an important element of the history, as you mentioned, right? These were put in to limit. We understand people fear when money is given directly from the feds to the locals or to local agencies, and the power being held in local communities. And both of these amendments were in response to, well, wait a minute. What are we doing letting communities decide for themselves? That is, we lean into this today, and we're appreciative that we still have the ability to lift up and center the work in community, but it is an interesting piece of our history, I think.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And another piece to pull on that, Denise, is that as community action often does, we find a way to make it work, right? Like we find a way to take the lemons and turn them into lemonade. And you're going to see that throughout our history. And I'm going to tell y'all now, you're going to see it into our future too, right? Because there will be other things that come along that we're going to have to respond to. And we always find a way. That's one of the things that brings me hope, is we always find a way. So in 1969, there's this fun fact for you, a little bit of trivia. Donald Rumsfeld was actually the director of the Office of Economic Opportunity, and Dick Cheney was his assistant. And both of these individuals were supporters and believers in community action. And another point here is a nod to our bipartisan appeal, and something, again, you will see throughout our history and into today. uh, the Office of Economic Opportunity under Rumsfeld and Cheney issued some pretty important guidance, this instruction, this OEO instruction. And this solidified this idea that community action success is not measured by just how many services we provide, right? That our success is measured more broadly by the ways we work in our communities to better serve the needs of all people, and specifically people experiencing poverty. So this was a really important point in our history that freed us up to not just have to live in service provision. So Denise, I think I'm going to pass back to you to take us through the Nixon administration and beyond.
As you mentioned, we have support from all sides of the aisle in community action. We would not have survived we're coming up on 59 years this year without the support of folks on all sides of the aisle. And you will hear as we go through the history, Republicans and Democrats have attacked the program in some way, shape, or form, or have not supported it in a way that we would have liked to have seen them support the program. If you go to David's History of the War on Poverty workshop, he'll talk a bit about, Congress is what supports community action because Congress is in local communities. Congressional representatives live in local communities and understand what you do every day. Presidential administrations, it's kind of that top down. And the Nixon administration did try to shut us down. They were sending out memos saying, we're going to not fund you anymore. Not that they had the power to do this. Just better close up shop, pack it up, get rid of the furniture, lock the doors. This person that you see here, the picture of Charles Braithwaite, excuse me, stares down on me every time I walk into this office. No pressure. But he, along with a few of his colleagues, are responsible for us still being here today. They stepped up and sued the Nixon administration to stop that dismantling of community action. That's when the network came together. They fought together and they pushed back together. And again, you'll hear that as we go through our history again, Republicans and Democrats, right? It's not just one party or the other. We have to remain united. We have to engage all sides of the aisle in our work together. Next slide, please. All right, so the 70s, a wild time. During Gerald Ford's administration, we lost the Office of Economic Opportunity, right? We lost the Economic Opportunity Act. It became the Community Service Act of 1974. Again, with this, the Office of Economic Opportunity disappeared, lost a cabinet seat, and you began to see the resources that went to local agencies start to get embedded in government. And I'm not going to say bureaucracy, but because I can't spell it, but I'll say it anyway, right? Those layers of bureaucracy create challenges as monies filter down. But 1974 was one of those watershed moments. Next slide, please. The next big watershed moment, 1981. Those of you who may remember the Ronald Reagan administration, he was all about not to the federal government, let's push everything down to states. Let's make things local. Let's give states the power. And in order for the CSA, for the money that was flowing directly still at that point from feds to local, for that money to survive, David Bradley from NCAF and others were instrumental in ensuring that community action stayed and pivoted and figured out what worked. And when you hear David talk about his work to author the Community Services Block Grant, the first one in 1981-82, he'll talk about some of the challenges and how quickly he had to pull all that stuff together. But it had to be done in order to keep those resources coming into community action. There's history about would it be embedded in the social services block grant? It would have been gone, right? It has its own identity. It maintained its identity. It maintained the tripartite structure. It maintained the board structure. It maintained the flexibility. It allowed us to survive. Is it what we would have wanted maybe in 1981, but you don't always get what you want, right? You have to pivot if you're going to navigate sometimes those political maelstorms. Next slide, please. So again, CSBG was born. We had then state offices instead of the money going from feds to local, like Head Start still does today. The money goes from the feds to the state, to the local agencies. And if you look in some of your state plans and some of your historical documents, 1981-82 was, again, a watershed moment. If you were a CAP agency in 1981-82 and you got that money, it became entitlement money. And not everybody likes the word entitlement necessarily, but that means unless something goes wrong in the organization, and there's a variety of processes states need to go through, but you are entitled as a CAP agency to get the community services block grant money year after year, again, because it's an infrastructure. It's not a program. CSBG is not a program. If I can say that 15 times over the next hour, I will. CSBG is about creating having an infrastructure in this country to fight poverty. That's why it's entitlement money. You don't compete for it. There's not, you compete maybe for some of the discretionary, right? 90% of that money goes to local agencies. 5% stays with the state, usually for admin purposes. Sometimes the state pushes some of that money out, but another 5% in most states then is used for discretionary projects. Some of those go to local agencies. Some of that money goes to state associations. Sometimes that money goes to other nonprofit organizations or public projects or things like that. But anyway, I'll stop talking and just say this is, again, when the block grant that we kind of know it today began being deployed. Mary Beth, would you add anything to that? Because I stumbled over my bleh.
No, just I think the big thing to know here is that this is what we still have, right? The Community Services Block Grant. We're going to talk about state offices in a little bit, but this really installs states as the administrator of CSBG, right? There's a removal from that federal level. That the activist federal government kind of is fading in this. So I think that's the only thing I'd add, and we'll pick up state offices in a little bit.
Thank you, Sherry, in the chat. I appreciate that. Next slide, please. All right, 1994, we buzzed through the 80s. And here we are in 1994. We have the Monitoring and Assessment Task Force. At that point, we had the Gore-Clinton administration, and they all wanted to prove, what is working, what part of government is working. And Community Action responded and says, well, we work. Again, not the last time you're going to hear an administration asking, is community action working? But they were asking that of all elements of government. And the MATF stepped up. They came together. They created the early stages, the early development of ROMA, and we're going to talk more about ROMA, results-oriented management and accountability. But that has a long history in community action, and it allowed us we created 6 national goals. Today we have 3, then we had 6. But again, outcomes. People say community action doesn't necessarily talk about outcomes. We've been talking about outcomes for a long, long time. Next, we'll come back to more ROMA. Don't you worry. Next slide, please. CSBG reauthorization. If you've heard David Bradley talk, last Congress, we had moved the needle on CSBG authorization further than it had been moved. We got it through the House. It was very, very exciting. CSBG has been reauthorized 5 times, 84, 86, 90, 94, 98. It did not make it through the Senate. We didn't get that far last time around, but we have a new Congress, that started this January, a new 2-year Congress. So there's another 2-year window where bills can be introduced like CSBG reauthorization. I'm sure David will be talking about that at his upcoming conference. So I hope that you will be attending that conference. I will just pause here. You see us put a lot of little huggy hearts and a lot of different logos here. That kind of gives you a flavor for some of the ways we talk and brand ourselves as community action. I'm just going to highlight the black and white. I call it a pinwheel. And I was actually at a CAP agency working as a frontline worker in 94. And my business card had a blue pinwheel circle on it. That is the historical logo. Some CAP agencies still use that logo today. But you'll see as we talk about some of our branding moves over the years, I just wanted to highlight that is a historical logo imprint. Next slide, please. Speaking of timelines, all right, so we spent some time in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. In the year 2000, the Community Action Network undertook some rebranding initiatives. At that point, the Huggy Heart came into existence, as does the current Community Action logo. In 2001, we had IM 49. We'll talk a bit more about IMs later, information memoranda. But in 01, we had ROMA become really mandatory for agencies. But what happened between '01 and '04, right? We had 9/11. And I know that's not here on our timeline, but those of us who were in the field at that point in time, the world really just stopped and things kind of got derailed in a lot of different ways after 9/11. So while Roma was supposed to go into full-blown requirements in the early aughts, it did get derailed and paused a bit. But anyway, moving on to '04, we heard again that CSBG has no discernible outcomes. But what do you mean we don't have discernible outcomes? Of course we do. So in '05, the network said we're going to push back again. We're going to create national indicators. We call them national performance indicators today, right? NPIs. We're going to create our initial set of national indicators back in 2005. Now, those of us again, '07, we had the Great Recession. The housing crisis, the banking crisis of '07, the Great Recession. We saw significant economic impact in our country, obviously. In '09, just like we saw during COVID, the administration, Congress, allocated $1 billion of CSBG to community action. $5 billion of weatherization at that point. There was a lot of money flowing in very, very quickly that all had to be spent very, very quickly in ARA. ARA was the American. Oh, I shouldn't have even started that.
American
Re
Reinvestment and Recovery Act.
yes, recovery and reinvestment are the two R's. Thank you. We had even less time to spend that money than we did in CARES. I digress. Then in 2011, President Obama doing his State of the Union. We've had the Great Recession. We're still in recession. And I remember sitting on my couch and watching President Obama do his State of the Union. He's talking about the country and the state of affairs and the challenges of a federal budget. Him having to say, we all have to cut programs we deeply care about, like community action. I had to rewind. I had a DVR, early DVR at that point. I'm rewinding. Did he just say community action? Where you start emailing everybody on my BlackBerry at that point, emailing everybody. Did he really just say community action? He did. Democratic president Barack Obama said he needed to cut community action in the State of the Union. The State of the Union, every word is parsed very, very carefully. The next day had to be one of the worst days of my professional life, going to advocate meetings. I remember sitting in a room and people saying, Denise, what's wrong? I'm like, did you see the State of the Union last night? Oh, was he talking about you? Yeah, he was talking about us. So it was a very, very hard day. But you know what community action did? Just like we did in the past, whether it was to the Nixon administration, whether it was to the Reagan administration, whether it was to the Clinton-Gore administration, we said, we have outcomes, we make an impact, we collect that data every day, and we're going to show you how good we are. So we stepped up and we said, we're going to show you exactly how we do what we do. We're going to demonstrate our accountability and our effectiveness. Mary Beth, you want to take us down that path?
Sure can. So the thing to know here is that based on what we heard from President Obama, the network really came together, as Denise was saying, to update that performance management system. And that is another theme from our history that you will hear, is that we work together to shape our future. We don't leave it to chance. We work together and form the future that we want. And so we work to create elements or create a new performance management system. And there were a couple of elements to it. One was Roma Next Generation. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Organizational standards and state and federal accountability measures. So in Roma Next Gen, the idea was to take our performance management to the next generation. And so one of the key pieces of Roma Next Gen was this idea of creating and articulating a national theory of change, which I will share with you in just a little bit, and supporting local agencies to reflect on it and think about what their theories of change were. Also, a renewal of necessity for us to work towards community change and go back to that historical focus of not just providing services, but thinking broader and systemically about the change that we create. We also then had a focus on improving our data collection and analysis. So this is where we had an updated new CSBG annual report. Before that was called the Information Survey. So if you ever see CSBGIS, that was the old report. We worked really tirelessly to create a new annual report, new performance indicators as part of that annual report to better define the work of community action, better report and tell the story of community action. You saw a focus on using data, and really an integration of all phases of our Roma cycle. So that was Roma Next Gen kind of in a nutshell. We also got the organizational standards out of this. And essentially what the organizational standards are meant to do is they're meant to ensure that all community action agencies who receive this federal funding have the capacity that is necessary to operate as a community action agency. So these organizational standards are basic organizational benchmarks for all of us. There are 3 thematic groups, 9 categories, 58 specific standards. For private CAAs, I believe it's 52 for public community action agencies. But we're not going to dive into org standards here today. We don't have time to do that, but we have a great website, or we have a great web page on our website that walks you through the org standards and what all is contained in them. But essentially, the point I want to make here is that this ensured some accountability, right? It ensured that we had the capacity that was necessary to operate efficiently and effectively. And so in addition to that was this theory of change, that this national theory of change that we developed collectively. And essentially what we did in this theory of change is we articulated what are the big overall goals that all 1,000 community action agencies work towards in some form or fashion. And so you see our 3 national goals at the top. We recognize that we are built on a foundation of 1,000 high-performing community action agencies, state associations, state offices, national partners, federal partners. And then we have some core principles. We have some things that we deeply believe about poverty that drive the services and strategies that we select to get us to those big goals. We also care about performance management. We have always cared about being accountable. And so that is baked into the way that we do our work. So that's the theory of change in like 30 seconds or less. We can talk more about theory of change anytime. Feel free to reach out if you'd like to dive into that or learn a little bit more about the history of when we developed all of these things. I mean, I'll tell you, that was an extensive process. Denise, I think you were doing webinars, what was it, like 2 or 3 times a week to gather input from the network to inform the development of these things. So it didn't happen by accident and took a lot of effort from a lot of people in this network. So Denise, you want to talk us through 2020 and beyond?
Happy to. Yes. Good times thinking about all those webinars and listening sessions for sure. But definitely network developed products. All those pieces came from the network. And that is how we roll as community action. Same thing during CARES, right? Those of you on today, you may be relatively new, you may be more seasoned, but we've all experienced the global pandemic. And community action was ready. We had, because of CSBG and our decades long history. We're in community. We were ready. We responded. Emergency services, community action agency said, Denise, we're not going back to the office. Our office never closed in many cases. We didn't close our services. We found ways around it. Those drive-through food pantries were community action. The drive-through tests, COVID tests were being done by community action agencies. We've been involved certainly in the recovery efforts that are going on. And certainly you demonstrate your resiliency. Next slide, please. The partnership collected information throughout the pandemic and has produced a number of reports. So if you are newer to community action and want to know what community action has done during the pandemic, or if you are getting ready for Hill visits or other sorts of educational opportunities with policymakers, funders, and regulators and others, these reports might be helpful. They're up on our website. This was a report we did early on in the pandemic. It was made to really reflect the first 6 months of the pandemic. And it's easy to kind of put it in the background about how hard that time was in terms of the immediate shutdown of a lot of society and how community action pivoted in such creative and amazing ways. And I know when I say the word pivot, everyone's like, stop using the word pivot. But that's exactly what you did as a network. Next slide, please. I have this poster actually hanging on my wall. I'm looking at it up there as well as here. Was designed to try to create the story for the history books about what community action did during the pandemic. You can see the multiple lanes of traffic, whether it's housing or health or food or education. Again, we keep equity at the center of our work. And if you see along the horizon, we have urban, suburban, rural, and frontier. We know that this country is vast and different things worked in different places. But I hope that you find that this graphical representation, which we hope it will stand the test of time, is a good representation of the work. Next slide, please. We also did a short video, just trying to say thank you. We did purchase a one-time license, I believe, of Alicia Keys' Good Job video. So we now have it to some free music as well. But we can grab this and send this out as well in the follow-up email to this webinar with the content. But if you can't find it, let us know. We're happy to send you this video link as well. Next slide, please. And this was kind of our final report. The partnership was funded with money for about 24 months. And our money ran out right at the end of September, like many of yours did. Not everybody's, but still some small states that have some CARES money left as the time of this recording. But this final report is available up on our website. It's available also in Spanish. There's kind of a more dynamic digital version, and hopefully you can find ways to use it, again, with policymakers, with funders, with regulators, just to say, this is what our network did during COVID. Our agency is a part of a larger family who really helped work to step in and save lives during the pandemic. Next slide, please. All right, so we keep talking about the network. Mary Beth, you want to take us through what some of this network structure looks like?
Sure can. So yeah, we've spent a lot of time on the local level, but our network goes well beyond just community action agencies. Community action agencies are the driver of our work, obviously, but we have state associations, we have state offices, we have national partners and federal funders who we're all going to talk about briefly today. So state associations are membership associations of local community action agencies organized by, you guessed it, states. If you don't know who your state association is or you haven't been engaged with them, I got to tell you, that should be your first phone call after this webinar is over. Your state association is really your chief advocate, your chief supporter in your local state. It also, they are a great support to you. They can provide training and technical assistance. They do a lot of advocacy at the state level because remember, CSBG is administered at that state level. You need good representation at your state. That's what your state association does. Your state association also enables you to connect with your fellow community action agencies and leverage your collective power, leverage your collective knowledge as well to better serve people and communities. State associations do have many different roles that might include, some do more training and technical assistance than others, some lean more heavily into advocacy, some more into communication and information dissemination. But the big thing to know is that state associations are often made up of all of you, the local community action agencies. So please, 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 if you're unfamiliar with your state association, get plugged in and give them your support as well. They are your body at the local level that represent you. So get involved if you haven't before. They do tend to have conferences as well. In case we have any board members on the call here as well, that could be a great opportunity for you to receive training somewhere in your state, get to meet other board members, and get to see other community action professionals and network with other community action professionals at the state level. We also have state CSBG offices. As we've discussed, CSBG is a block grant, which means that the feds block the money to the states who then administer it out to local agencies. So your state CSBG office is responsible for the statewide administration of that funding. That includes setting CSBG policy, which means that CSBG might look a little bit different state to state. They are also responsible for the administration of CSBG annual reporting. They also monitor local community action agencies. They're required by the federal act to do that monitoring. And they're also required to assess compliance with those organizational standards that we talked a little bit about earlier. And while our state CSBG offices are some of our they are one of the offices we work with most frequently, is probably the way I want to put that. There are a number of other state offices, because as community action agencies, you don't just receive CSBG funding, right? You have weatherization funding, you have LIHEAP funding, you have TANF funding, or you may. And so you have a number of different state offices that you may interact with as well. Denise, what do you want to add to that?
I think you covered, I think it's good to have a relationship with your state CSBG office. It's also good as a network in your state that if you need to, you have also power together. So if you're a new executive director, for instance, get to know your other colleague executive directors, because there may be times where you need to bond together. It might be your CSBG office, it might be your weatherization office, it could be your TANF office, but as a network, you have power and influence together when working with your state offices as well. Oops, you're muted.
Denise, I think I'm actually, oh, that's right. I'm still going. That's right. So in addition to your state partners, we also have a number of national partners. We have a network of national partners that seek to support the Community Action Network broadly. And we're going to talk about each of these friends very briefly here. First is CAPLAW, and CAPLAW is your resource for all things related to the legal side of running your community action agency, and that goes beyond just CSBG. You will find a great deal of information and resources that can help you navigate things like HR, board governance. Even they put out guidance, great guidance on even tax information and things of the sort. So if you ever have a legal issue, if you're ever unsure about legal guidance that you're receiving, call CAPLAW. Like the partnership, they are a membership organization, so be sure that you are a member of CAPLAW. Get connected with CAPLAW. They are a great resource to you. I called CAPLAW when I worked at a local agency. You know, when I was in audit, when I was dealing with my state, I called CAPLAW all the time, and they were so helpful to me. And so, Denise, I'm going to pass back to you to introduce us to NCAF.
Great. And I'll just add, I still call CAPLAW. So we always, CAPLAW is a fantastic resource. And I'm seeing in the chat a question about what would be recommended for onboarding, right? And orientation, because it's tough, right? If you have brand new staff, you want to give them a flavor, but it can be a bit overwhelming. There's just so much, right? So certainly this recording and others like it I think can be helpful for community action. There's also, we'll talk later about CAPLAW's 4-point series, the ABCSBGs. Were very helpful, but again, it's a lot of detailed information. So you kind of have to weigh a lot of that. And we can follow up. Feel free to email us. We could talk about some of the specific webinars, whether it comes to CSBG org standards, Roma. There's really kind of something that depends on the person and their staff position as well. So there's a lot of different things out there. So NCAF, have we given you enough acronyms yet? We got a few more acronyms in our pocket. So NCAF stands for the National Community Action Foundation. It's not a foundation where you write grants or write proposals and they give you money. It's an old way that 501c3s could opt to call themselves, or 501c4s call themselves foundations. So David Bradley is the founder and chief executive officer. He is an honorary CCAP. He is our lobbyist on the Hill for CSBG weatherization. He has been fighting for CSBG reauthorization for quite a while. Keeps moving his chess pieces on the board. It's fascinating as a policy geek to watch him do that. It's an amazing kind of skill set that he's able to bring to the table. He has a conference coming up in March. We're filming this in February of 2023. Every March, he does a conference. It's a great event for leaders at organizations, CAP agencies, your board members to come and get to meet members of Congress, but also for members of Congress to see community action. So happy to talk more about that, but you can become a free member of NCAF. Anybody in community action can do that. There's no cost to it. You can just go to ncaf.org, how to be a member, and you can join and show your support for NCAF. Next slide, please. Our next sister organization is NASCASP. That's an acronym that's really tough to say, but it's the National Association for State Community Services Programs. Excuse me, it's the national association that works with your state CSPG offices and your state weatherization offices. They do training, technical assistance, toolkits. They do a lot of the data collection and screening with OCS to produce the CSBG annual report. Cheryl Williams is their new executive director, and their conference will be in April this year. They have one in the spring in DC, and then they have one in the fall that rotates around the country. If it comes to your neck of the woods as a community action agency, I encourage you to attend. I think it's really good for CAP agencies and state associations to go into the room when the states are having their conference. I always think it's a fascinating conference. Next slide, please. Another sister organization is ANSERT, the Association of Nationally Certified Roma Trainers. Roma, again, and another one of those acronyms, results-oriented management and accountability. I am a certified Roma trainer. Mary Beth is a certified Roma trainer. We would encourage you, as part of your career path, it's good to get a Roma training certification, or what they call now the Roma implementer certification. Both are very good programs. You really get up to speed on outcomes versus outputs, the national performance indicators, how the assessment, the planning, the implementation, the data collection, and the analysis, that whole Roma cycle all fits together. A really great organization. Next slide. And then our friends at OCS, the Office of Community Services. That is where CSBG flows. In addition to CSBG, LIHEAP, Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, LIWAP, the Low Income Water Assistance Program, both sit within OCS. SSBG, the Social Services Block Grant, sits within OCS, and CED, the Community Economic Development Program, sits within OCS. As we've been talking about, OCS takes CSBG and it flows to the states, then flows to the agencies. OCS's job is to monitor states. Just like local agencies usually get monitored by your state, OCS monitors states in a very similar way, right? So they issue things called IMs, information memoranda. We talked about IM 49 earlier, which is the IM, I believe, that goes to Roma, I want to say. IM 138, which is the information memoranda around org standards. And then there's Dear Colleague letters, which are a bit more informal. Both of those are guidance. Neither one of those are law, but they are guidance and help inform states and local agencies on what OCS's intent is. Currently, Dr. Laniqua Howard is the director. She is a political appointee appointed by President Biden to lead that office. That will fluctuate depending on the presidential administration. And but Sharice Johnson is career staff, and she's the director of the Office of Community Assistance. So, right, regardless of what happens with the administrations, Ms. Johnson stays put as career staff, or stays put as long as she wants to work within OCS, I should say. So, next slide. All right. We've talked a bit about some of our other national partners, our RPIC, Regional Performance Innovation Consortia, and state associations. RPICs are really kind of the grant-funded state association in each of the ACF regions, and then they send money to each of the individual state associations, and they partner and collaborate together. The Department of Energy, the Office of Head Start, HUD, National Head Start Association, and APHSA, the American Public Human Services Association. Great. Next slide, please. And finally, the partnership, or NCAP, or the National Community Action Partnership, whatever you want to call us. We are your membership association. We work primarily with local agencies and state associations, but we also have state offices that are members of us, and we work with the entire network. Tools, resources, we do a public policy platform. We have weekly webinars. Today's our webinar Wednesday, ironically enough, and on Friday at 4 o'clock Eastern, your inbox should receive an e-newsletter from the partnership that is chock full of just a ton of information. Next slide, please. And we do a wide range of training in TA. This is just a sampling of the things that we can do, but please reach out if there's something that we can do for your own local organization, your state office, or your state association. Please let us know. We're doing more special convenings. We just had our winter conference. We're going to be doing our summer conference in mid to late August this year in Atlanta, Georgia. It moves around the country. Next year, it'll be in Seattle for our 50th or 60th anniversary. And then in 2025, we're going to be in Detroit, which I'm very excited by. I grew up there, so I'm excited about Detroit. So anyway, a ton of stuff here where the partnership can be helpful. Next slide, please. And I know we're coming up on about an hour, so we might here go a little bit over. So again, we're going to be sending out the recording and the slides, but just wanted to flag that for folks that we recognize that we're at the top of the hour. We'll keep going for a bit here to work our way through the slides, and we'll make sure to send them out to everybody. Can anyone go to these conferences? Yes, they can. Whether it's the partnerships conference, NCAP's conference, NASCA's conference, or CAPLA, it's open to the entire network. Local agencies, state associations, state offices, and the national partners. We can all attend. And when I was at a state, so I used to be at the New York State CAP Association. I used to go to all of them, and it was really good to get a representation. And now in this job, I still go to all of them. But I know local agencies, you can't always do that, but find the ones that work for you and maybe spread them around over the course of a couple of years. Hit a couple of them to see and get a different perspective on the network. The mission of the partnership is to ensure that the causes and conditions of poverty are effectively addressed and to strengthen, promote, serve, and represent the Community Action Network. Again, the entire network, not just local agencies, but agencies, associations, state offices, national partners. Our vision is one for the country. Next slide, please. Our vision is of the Community Action Partnership, a nation that creates opportunities for all people to thrive, builds strong, resilient communities, and ensures a more equitable society. So again, we try to build in the equity piece into everything that we're doing. And I think you'll see it here again in our value statements. Our value statements start off with, we believe that all people should be treated with dignity and respect. And we recognize that structural race, gender, and other inequities remain barriers that must be addressed. We understand that poverty is undergirded in a historical context and a systemic context in structural racism. We understand redlining. We understand exclusions when it comes to Social Security for certain types of workers and job positions in our country. We understand that minimum wage doesn't apply to all workers based on certain systemic and historical practices. You'll see a lot of our main stage speakers in community action speak to racial equity. We take equity as the large bucket, but we do as a large container, excuse me, but we do center our work and start with racial equity. We believe that this nation has the capacity and moral obligation. A lot of us come to this work due to faith. And while we are a secular network, this value statement for me really resonates. I believe this country could end poverty. It's a matter of political will. And I believe we have the moral obligation to ensure that no one is forced to live on the streets, be hungry at night, not have access to education or health care. So I love that this is one of our value statements as a network. And we believe that with hope, adequate resources, and opportunities, everyone can reach their full potential, what it means to them. That is a core value of community action, that people get to decide for themselves what success is. And then we pledge ourselves to creating an environment that focuses on innovation and excellence. And we know that we have to collaborate. We're not doing this by ourselves. So Mary Beth, I'm going to turn it over. Oh no, am I still going? Sorry about that. Let me take another sip of water. So I know we're throwing a lot at you. Again, you'll have the slide deck, you're going to have the content, and you'll have the recording. Another part of how we work with the network, that is another element that you should be aware of, is our Equity and Economic Mobility Commission. Our commissions are inclusive of local agencies, state associations, state offices, national partners. And this commission is really focused to advise our board of directors on issues and actions related to equity. This commission has been around now for more than it's coming up on 3 years. It was right before the pandemic. It was established, early 2020. So it is coming up on 3 years have been in existence, and I think it's been a very fruitful commission for the partnership. Next slide. We also have several other commissions that you might hear about. We have a National Head Start Task Force. As we said earlier, about half of the network operates a Head Start, Early Head Start program. Public and private nonprofit CAPS both operate Head Start. So we have a task force specific to community action issues in Head Start. We also have one focused on energy and climate change, weatherization. We also have a commission focused on our excellence program, which goes to organizational excellence. And we also have a commission focused on CCAP, Certified Community Action Professional, which again is about personal excellence, striving for personal excellence. Next slide, please. We also have tools and resources up on our website focused on equity. We want to ensure that local agencies have the support to have the conversations internally with your staff, with your board, with your community in ways that are meaningful for you. 2 years ago, the partnership's board of directors declared racism as a public health crisis. As part of that, we've created a toolkit to help you as local agencies to have these conversations in your own local community. We joined with the American Public Health Association and others to create this toolkit because it's not just community action. This declaration is happening in governmental settings, in healthcare settings, in educational settings, all sorts of settings where people understand that racism is impacting our health as a society, individually and collectively. Next slide, please. We also then hosted in 2021 our first National Community Action Equity Summit. Those of you who were there, we had just a fantastic series of speakers and presenters. But if you weren't there, good news. A lot of those sessions were recorded. The tools, the resources, the sessions are up on our website. We actually had graphical representations drawn from each of the sessions as well. If you're a visual learner, you get to see the information as well as hear the information. So we hope that that is of value to you. And there's so much content there that is still very relevant here 2 years later. Next slide, please. All right. I know that one of the number one questions that I get when I'm in the field is how come people don't know community action? Has to be the number one question. And people say, how come we don't have a branding guide? Well, you know what? We have a branding guide. It is available up on our website. Many community action agencies use the national branding in a variety of ways. We don't have any requirements any longer that you have to use a logo with this color of blue or this kind of angle. You can only use the Huggy Heart this way. But we do have some guidelines around some language, some font, Pantone colors and things like that. I still think the red is a little pink for my taste, but we do have that available up on our website. Next slide, please. And you'll see here that that we see agencies use the Huggy Heart in a variety of different ways. You need a Huggy Heart in your agency's color? Let us know. We've developed Huggy Hearts in all sorts of colors. We even have one in rainbow for Pride Month in June. We actually have an updated rainbow version as well, which I believe is even more inclusive of equity when it comes to June and celebrating Pride Month. So we can always create stuff for you if you can't create it yourselves. So give us a holler. But I want to show you this next slide, which shows you kind of the diversity. You can tell that they're all part of the same family. They don't all look the same. They don't all say exactly the same thing in terms of community action agency or community action program or whatever, but you can tell they're part of the same family. And I encourage you as a local agency, even if you can't do it for your agency's logo, we have a logo that says a proud member of the Community Action Network. Is that something that you can use in your own local agency? Or can you take a look at your own website and find ways to tie in the Huggy Heart or use it in some swag for an all staff day or something like that? But I just love this slide. It just makes everyone look like we're all just part of the same family, coast to coast. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Mary Beth.
Great. Thank you, Denise. And so building on that, taking some of these great branding resources, hey, every May is Community Action Month, and it's a great opportunity for us to celebrate the work of community action. It's a nationwide celebration, and we have a toolkit that will help you to celebrate with all kinds of pre-made Huggy Hearts, with different graphics, with suggestions of ways you can celebrate. social media templates. This is a fantastic tool and resource, and it's not only good for May. I mean, really, you could take any of these resources and use them throughout the year. So highly recommend that you check out our Community Action Month toolkit. Also, here's an example of the calendar. We put together a calendar every year, and you can participate in this with us throughout the month. Denise really does watch agencies' social media. We see she will like all of your posts, she'll thumbs up them, she'll share them. So make sure that if you are posting things, tag us, because we love to see your celebrations, and Denise really loves to see your celebrations in particular. I can attest to that. So check out our calendar, participate throughout the year, or throughout the month, excuse me. Our current guide for May 23 is not up yet, but it will be released very soon. And just so you guys know, we always have a webinar that unveils the toolkit, talks about what you can expect, and we have some dialogue with you and answer your questions about Community Action Month. So more to come on that very soon, okay? But in the meantime, check out the 2022 guide. One of the other things that the National Community Action Partnership does is we support the development and maintenance of a code of ethics for our network. What you see on the screen is our recently revised code of ethics. If you think you've seen the code of ethics before, do know that this was just approved earlier this month. We're going to be holding a webinar on March 8th about the revised code of ethics, and that will dive deeper into them. But just wanted to show you these code of ethics, make you aware that we do have some practices and some principles that we live up to, that we believe all community action professionals should live up to in our work. And at their core, they say that we remain focused on our mission, that we are outspoken advocates and educators, that we seek to inspire confidence and trust in the community action movement, that we believe in practicing service above ourselves, that we seek to be leaders, support leaders, and create leaders beyond us, and that we don't just stop at compliance, we strive for performance excellence. And so, as I said, there will be a webinar that dives into these on March 8th. Keep an eye out for those registration details in our e-news on Friday. In the vein of organizational excellence, I want to introduce you to CCAP, the Certified Community Action Professional Certification. This is the premier professional certification for community action leaders. Essentially, what it recognizes is it certifies your knowledge of community action, of anti-poverty strategies, of leadership and management principles. And it also verifies your ability to apply those concepts and the code of ethics. So if you'd like to learn more about CCAP, you can check that out on our website. And when you achieve your CCAP, you get a nifty little pin that we all ooh and ah after, ooh and ah over, and you are recognized at our annual convention when you go through CCAP and achieve your CCAP. You get to walk the stage. It's a big professional achievement. I'll tell you, CCAP kind of has this reputation of being maybe perhaps a little challenging, but I will tell you it's challenging in a good way. I think it really calls us to be our best version of our professional selves in this work. And it was a game changer for me. And so if you are in a CCAP, I hope that you'll learn more, and I hope that you'll join us and become a CCAP. So CCAP verifies excellence for individuals, that individuals perform and behave in excellence. But what about excellence in your agency? That's really where Pathways to Excellence comes in. It supports local community action agencies to go beyond compliance and move towards excellence in their operations. We define excellence in community action by articulating 35 best-in-class practices. Those best-in-class practices are identified by fellow community action experts. They are real-world practices. They're not pie in the sky. These are things that community action agencies can achieve. And through a really intentional journey of continuous quality improvement, you go through a process that helps you to learn the standards, that helps you to assess yourself against those standards, to receive peer feedback to improve your operations, and then work to implement and align your practices to bring you to those best-in-class practices. We have a new tiered approach in Pathways to Excellence that allows us to meet you where you are in your excellence journey and recognize you as you take strides towards the achievement of those best-in-class practices. So we hope that you will learn more about Pathways to Excellence. Myself and Tony Stottlemyre are part of the Excellence team. If you're curious about it, we would love to have a conversation with you about that. All right, so Denise, I think we're coming to the end here, and we've just got some tools and resources that we wanted to highlight for folks, unless we've missed anything in the chat.
There's one question from Shannon about how long should you be in a position before you try the CCAP? I believe the requirements currently are that you need to be in community action for 2 years, I think. I don't know if that's at the time of application or the time of the exam. I'd have to go back and look for sure. But it's about 2 years to give yourself a little bit of a foundation there. Before you kind of go down that path. Tawny Stottlemyre on our team is going to be the primary CCAP contact. I will say without CCAP, I would not be in this chair today. I'm just going to say that as bluntly as that. CCAP changed my career trajectory. It changed my life. And not to be hyperbolic about that. It's an amazing grounding in community action. It's really, really great. We'll be doing probably a promo for CCAP this spring, I would guess. We often do some of that. And so keep an ear on. I'm glad to see some interest in the chat. So that's really great. So let's talk about tools and resources because, you know, we haven't filled up your head enough here today. So next slide, please. Because if you want more detail about CSBG, I have attended 2 of these 4. I need to attend the other 2. You're like, Denise, you've been doing this for why are you? Because you always learn something new every time. I go to a cap law session, I learn something new. These sessions are fantastic. It really does get into the detail, the minutia of CSBG. So if your job is definitely part of CSBG specifically, I highly recommend this series. Thanks. Next slide. The other piece I keep referencing is David Bradley's History of the War on Poverty. His next time that he's doing this is April 24th and 25th. There is a cost to it, but it is worth the cost. I did create a temporary tiny URL because the other one really wasn't very jot downable. So NCAF history, tiny URL, whatever. You can register, talk to your executive director. Maybe there's a way that a group of you could attend that particular session or bring it out to your state association. Always a great opportunity as well. And as I said earlier, join NCAF. It's free, no charge. Next slide, please. We've been talking about the org standards. And I think I put the chat into the link in the chat earlier. But this again, we have a ton of resources, webinars, and more webinars on the org standards. Sherry, I don't know where it's actually being held. I thought maybe it was virtual, his History of the War on Poverty. I don't know that for sure. I looked on the website. It was unclear to me. So my apologies for not having that level of detail. We'll see if we can find it. Next slide, please. And you know what? You want to learn on your phone? We can help you learn on your phone. We got Moodle. We have an adult learning a learning platform. We have Community Action Academy, free sessions up on our website, full curriculum on family-centered coaching. If you're involved in the CCAP program, you'll get familiar with Moodle. There's just a ton of stuff on Moodle for you to work with. Next slide. And again, you can get this mobile app on your phone. You can learn anytime, anywhere. You have trouble sleeping on the plane, we have a webinar for you. Anyway. And then the next slide is our Community Action Impact Report. This was done in 2019, so pre-COVID. I still think the content, the data, the stories, the impact, and the visualization of the information is still a very usable tool. It's available up on our website. There's also a 2-pager, I think is on the next slide, that is a nice handout for folks. If you ever need it or could give you a sample of how to demonstrate or document or visualize some of your own data, all that stuff is available up on our website. You can grab all the little graphics, copy, paste, make them your own. They're all available free of charge. Next slide, please. There are several textbooks or books related to community action body of knowledge. The first one there, Community Action Leaders, is a current textbook created by Dr. Delitso Sulamoyo, who is our board chair, along with other CAP directors in the state of Illinois, along with the University of Illinois. This is a textbook used at the University of Illinois that talks about nonprofit and public leadership. And it's based in the community action model. It's a fantastic text. It's a little pricey, but for a textbook, it's not all that pricey, but it's a good one. You can Google it and try to find it there. We also have the history of community action up on our website, written by Jim Masters, a longtime community action leader, and the maximum feasible success. I believe you can Google that. I believe it's what do they call that? A Google book or something like that now. But you can get that. It's a great resource. Robert Clark, see the history, dive into the history. It's a great resource. Next slide, please. And again, the books of today to put into your toolbox. I talked about this at our winter conference as well. You can't just buy the books, you got to read the books. But I find that if you can get these books into your toolbox, you will know a lot about poverty today. We have The Color of Law, which focuses a lot on redistricting, or not redistricting, excuse me, redlining in our nation's history from day one of our history to today, and how we as a country need to address our housing policy from a structural and policy and legal perspective. Evicted by Matthew Desmond, who has a new book coming out on poverty later in March. Very excited by that. Keep an eye out for that. Made by Stephanie Land. Stand from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist from Dr. Kendi. $2 a day. A long-standing book on my recommended reading list. It's a quick read. It'll really show you the fallacy of TANF and the fallacy of cash welfare in our country and the struggles of families in America. Our most recent keynoter, Clint Smith, How the Word is Passed. Fantastic text. I strongly encourage you to pick that up at your bookstore. It just came out in paperback. Heartland talks about rural poverty, I think in a very strong and authentic way. And The Forgotten Americans talks about policy, trying to encourage our country to find policies that not go too far left or too far right. Well, too far left and too far right for my hands, but really that middle ground, and where can we find success from a policy perspective in America, by Isabel Sawhill. She's fantastic. So again, you read these books, you're going to have a lot in your back pocket. That's all I'll say about that. Next slide, please. Mary Beth, is this you or is this still me? Still me?
Yeah, but I'm happy to take it if you prefer.
Yeah, go ahead. That'd be great.
Yeah, so throughout this session, you've been hearing a lot of the services that we provide. We do also offer customized solutions for your local community action agency. Or your state association or your state. We're happy to provide one-on-one training and technical assistance for you. You can learn more about that on our website. And you can always just reach out to us as well. If you have a particular training need, you can contact any of us. And actually, on the next slide is all of our contact information. All of our contact information is also on our website. You can even see our bios and learn a little bit about us if you'd like, if you're interested. But if you click on our photos, you can also get our emails. So here's our contact information. We are here to support you. So whatever it is that you need, never hesitate to reach out, to email any of us. We try our very best to be responsive to you. And we also travel a lot to your state association conferences. So when we're out there, we'd love to see you. We'd love to say hello, grab us, talk to us. Want to hear how things are going at the local level. So please stay connected. Denise, what do you want to add?
We haven't talked much about our energy weatherization piece, but you'll see here on the Twitter line, we have @NCAP Energy. If you are a weatherization provider or engaged in weatherization, we have a ton of resources that we're developing. We're very much leaning into weatherization and energy. So keep a bigger eye out for more stuff in that space, as well as our public policy work, which more will be coming out on that as well. So phew, that was a lot. There will be a test. Oh wait,
Yeah.
no, there will not be.
But we do have a session evaluation, and we'll be posting that in the chat in just a minute. So your feedback is very important to us. Please take the session evaluation. Our colleague will post that there for you, Denise Waits. Thank you so much for posting that. If you have other feedback, please email us. We love to hear from you. And we do really take your feedback seriously for the future.
We try to offer this session about twice a year. So we are here in the early part of 23. So later 23, you'll see another session. So your feedback will definitely impact what we present the next time. And if there are other sessions that you think would be helpful to help ramp up learning, please let us know what they are. We're always open to that. So thank you for all you do every day. You're just amazing. This network is amazing. If you're new to community action, I hope that you love it as much as we do. The people are fantastic. The work is soul filling, and you are changing lives and saving lives every day across this country. People say, the war on poverty. We win the war on poverty every day, one family at a time, and you make it happen. So thank you, everybody, for your support, all you do, and we will see you soon. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.